This is Michael Whitaker. This is the third of 21 posts that I'm doing on LinkedIn and Facebook regarding 21 photos that I've captured over the years. For this post, I'm using my photograph that's entitled My Lady of Guantanamo. It is from a documentary project I completed that I named A Certain Amount of Light, Faces of Cuba. As background for this photograph, I began the post by identifying that my mother is one of the major influences in my life. What I loved most about her was that she was an unpretentious person with a gentle spirit. My mother never wanted to be the center of attention, and that made an impression on me. Despite all the attention I've received over the years, I still am not comfortable being the center of attention. During my first career, I interacted on a daily basis, routinely, with very pretentious and narcissistic people who aggressively pursued attention. Consequently, when I began my career in photography, I had a keen interest in capturing images of people who mostly go unnoticed. Thus, the title of this lesson is Focusing on the Unnoticed, focusing on people who traditionally do not end up being the subjects of photographs. When I started out, I decided to do a documentary series about Cuba. For 10 years, I was on a national task force in the United States that dealt with sexual offending. On that task force was an individual with whom I was very close named Dr. Carlos Laredo. Carlos currently lives in Austin, Texas, but he was originally from Cuba. After the revolution, when Fidel took over, Carlos and his family relocated to the United States. During the 10 years that Carlos and I were on the same national task force, I listened to many conversations during which Carlos fondly remembered his time and experiences in Cuba. Thus, I decided I was going to create a photo documentary project about Cuba as tribute to my friend Carlos Laredo. The way I handled this project was that for 3 years, during a 3-year period, I went to Cuba 6 different times for the purpose of photographing people in every province. I didn't want to just go to Havana or the other tourist spots in Cuba. I wanted to travel to every single province in Cuba and capture images of people from that province. Luckily, I was able to do that, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. During my trips to Cuba, during those 6 trips, which normally lasted around 3 weeks each, I stayed in the home of private citizens. In Cuba at that time, for $5 per night, I would get a place to sleep, a clean place to sleep, an indoor toilet, breakfast, and the dinner on the first night. So for $5, I got a place to sleep, a place to bathe, and 2 meals. Typically, the homes in which I stayed were the people who had television. There was television in Cuba at the time. And as the family that had the television in the community, a lot of people would come over around 7 p.m. to watch the Colombian soap opera on national Cuban television. Almost without exception, in all these private homes in which I stayed, people would come over at 7 o'clock right after dinner, would watch the Cuban soap opera, and then they would want to talk to me. I thought they wanted to talk to the crazy American, but it turned out that the first impression of me, and I'm not sure why, was that everyone thought I was from Germany, which really piqued their interest a little more. but it was still okay with them that I was from America. And they were all very kind and very considerate to me, which caused me to ask, why are you being so cordial to me when my government has a long-standing blockade against your country that limits the amount of goods and resources that you can get? Without exception, no matter where I was, they all responded the same way. The problem we have is with your government. We have no problem with you, and we're glad to welcome you into our community. At the time, and as it still stands, I didn't speak Spanish, and I still don't speak very much Spanish. So when I wandered around different towns, different villages, when I saw somebody that caught my interest that I wanted to photograph, I would hold up my camera, point to it, point it at the individual I was interested in, and I would say, por favor, please. I was just saying, please, will you let me take your photograph, make your photograph? Sometimes people said no. It wasn't the most frequent response. Other times people said just simply yes. Other times people asked a ton of questions, which made me regret I ever asked to take their photograph. And then sometimes people would say, wait a minute, let me run in the house. I better get my hair fixed and all that kind of stuff. And I really wasn't interested in taking their photograph because that's the initiation of impression management. I still took the photographs. I just didn't use them in my project. When I saw this lady in Guantanamo, I'd been in the public market and I was walking away from the market. I saw this lady standing, leaning on the rail, just like in the photograph on her front porch. I loved what I saw so much. My first thought was, I'm going to capture her image without her permission. But I made a commitment in this project that I would not do that. I would always ask permission. So I walked over toward this lady. When I got within, 4 or 5 feet of her, I raised my camera, pointed my camera toward her, and said, por favor. She was standing just as you see her in this photograph. I'm pointing off here because I can see the photo on my monitor over here. She was standing just as she appears in this photo. When I said, por favor, she very gently nodded her head like that. I immediately shot off or captured 4 frames of film. I only shot film, Kodak Tri-X 400 during this project, and I typically took 100 rolls of film with me on every trip. And if I ran out of film in Cuba, I was out of film. So I made sure not to take too many pictures, or I made sure to keep up with how many pictures I had exposed. So I never exposed a lot of frames. With this lady, I exposed 4 frames. After I exposed those 4 frames, I looked at her, waved my hand, said buenos dias, and then I said, muchas gracias. Thank you for letting me do this. She had not said a word the entire time. She had not moved the entire time. When I said thank you, she again slowly nodded her head. And I walked on down the street, never learning her name. Consequently, I didn't have a name for naming this photograph, so I entitled it My Lady of Guantanamo. I don't want to get too much over on spiritual aspects, but this was a very spiritual experience to me, to capture this lady as I saw her. When I looked at her, I recognized dignity. And I was so afraid when I asked permission that she would change her self-presentation, but she didn't. I looked back once and she was still standing there like that. Typically, almost without exception, images that I captured in Cuba that I used in this project, a certain amount of light, I went back on a later trip and gave them a copy of the photograph, a print of the photo, and explained to them that print isn't a formal project. Their image will be appearing in a formal project. Guantanamo is at the other end of the island. It's on the eastern end of the island from Havana. It was not easy to get back to. In fact, it took me 17 years to get back to Guantanamo. And when I went back at the invitation of the government in Guantanamo to create a documentary project about the Cruzada Teatro Guantanamo Baracoa, which is another project I'll show an image from later. So I never got back to Guantanamo to give this lady her print until after 17 years. I take good notes, so I knew exactly where the house was. You can see her house number above her head in the image. So I was able to walk directly back to the house. I knew the name of the street. I had the friend of mine with me who had gotten me to do the Cruzada project. He went with me, and we went to the house to give this lady the print. When we got there, the granddaughter was there, and I'd photographed the granddaughter all those years ago. So I recognized her, and strangely enough, she recognized me. So through my friend, we explained that I captured the image, that the image has been displayed. This image actually been in 4 gallery shows and 1 museum exhibition. So I was telling the granddaughter that, I'm here to give you a copy, to give your grandmother a copy of this image. And she looked very sad and said, "My grandmother died at the age of 107, 5 years after you captured this image." So the first thing that hit me, number one, is she's dead. When I photograph people, they're so alive to me. It's just hard to believe these people are now gone. But she was 102 when I photographed her. She died 5 years later at 107. So I asked many questions about her. My friend was able to translate. I learned that her name was Primitiva. And her granddaughter confirmed that I had correctly identified that Primitiva was, in fact, an unpretentious person with a gentle spirit. What I saw in Primitiva's face when I captured this image was dignity. And Primitiva's granddaughter confirmed that she was a very dignified person. So I left the photograph with the granddaughter and never was able to show Primitiva her image and how many times her image had been shown. This project is typically posted on the website of the Social Documentary Network. I would have put a link up here or in the post for this, but the SDN website was hacked this last weekend, and the website's currently shut down while they try to repair the damage that was done. So as of the time of this video, I don't have a link to share with that. But when they get the link back up, you can go to socialdocumentary.net and view all the images. In these 21 images I'm presenting, there will be, I think, 2, maybe 3 more images from this project that I will share along the way. And hopefully by then the SDN website will be back up. One of my shows with these images was in New York City, which if you're a photographer, you know is a big hoot to have photos on the walls in New York City. I had 10 images on the walls. It wasn't a solo exhibition, but I had 10 images on the wall. At one point, a lady comes in, is looking around, and I see her ask my friend that ran the gallery, "Is the guy here that captured these images?" She pointed me out, and the lady came over and said, "I'm a literary agent. Have you ever thought about doing a book out of these images?" It was music to my ears. I'd already done a book. I had a copy of the dummy of the book, not with me, but there in New York City. And I said, "I have it." So she said, "When can you come by my office?" I went the next day. When a New York literary agent says, "I want to see your work," you go ASAP. I showed her the entire mock-up of the book. She loved it. and said, "Can I shop this around?" I said, "Sure, please." I was excited beyond belief. Was so excited to visit my own literary agent. She shopped the book around. Two groups that produce photography books were interested. One on the West Coast and one there in New York City. There was a catch. They both had the same request. They wanted me to mix the photos up when I asked, and to change them out, take some out, put others in. When I asked what the problem was, they both said almost the identical thing. These people look too happy. This book will be considered a pro-Castro book. He was still alive at the time. They said this book will be considered a pre-Castro book if we publish it as it is. This project means a lot to me. And bottom line, with both publishers, I did not agree to change the book. Neither one wanted to publish it, and my literary agents dropped me. So it goes. I still intend someday, if I don't run out of time, to self-publish this book because it means very much to me. It has been displayed in 5 different exhibitions. In Memphis, where I'm originally from, I had a solo show of 30 of my certain amount of light images. At one point on opening night, I was standing there, and there was a lady standing over looking at this image. And very seriously, I'm not kidding, there were tears coming down her cheek. So I looked, I felt very awkward about it. And Arnold, who owned the gallery, grabbed me and says, "Come on, let's go talk to this lady." He was sensing a cell. And I went over and I said, "Are you okay? Do you find this photograph distressing?" And she said, "Just the opposite. I am so moved by her dignity that I'm really not sure how to react." She said, "This is such a beautiful image." So Arnold, the owner, said, "Could we interest you in purchasing this photograph?" The lady was a Caucasian lady, and her response was, "Oh no, if I bought this photograph and hanged it on my wall, I would spend all my time trying to explain that I'm not related to this person. I just really admired her." So I didn't make a sale, which was okay. I have given this photo to several people. No, not several, a few people. And some love it dearly. I have a friend, previous coworker, Tamara, in New Hampshire, who just feels like she knows this lady, and it is hanging on her wall like she was a family member. So this photograph usually generates a lot of emotion. I'm not sure what else to say about it. This is one of my 2 favorite photographs. This photograph and the one from photo post number 2, Love and Affection, are the only 2 photographs that hang here in my workspace. They're both here because they both inspire me that it's worth the effort to photograph individuality as opposed to photographing managed impressions. So I see these photographs. I'm pointing like you can see both walls, one's on each side of me. I see these photographs every time I sit down at my table here. If you have questions about this post, please put them in the comments section, either on Facebook or LinkedIn. As always, I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate that you have interest in viewing my photos and the thoughts behind me capturing each photo. Thank you.